Welcome to the first part of a demonstration showing how we can create a simple mobile application for maintaining customer records on an SAP system. This first part focuses on the CastIron integration, and on the screen now you can see the CastIron Development Studio. I have an orchestration for retrieving the customer list from SAP, the sequence of events being that the mobile application would make a request to the Worklight server, which would then make a request to CastIron. CastIron receives this request through this first activity, receive request, moves on to invoke a function in SAP to get the customer list, writes that data to XML and sends that data back to the Worklight server. There are three other orchestrations for getting customer information, the customer details, updating those customer details, and for creating a new customer. What I'm going to show now is how we can create a new orchestration to receive that information from SAP and write the data to a SQL Server database. So moving on to my blank orchestration I have here, on the right hand side on the Activities tab I can see the connectors we have within CastIron Studio. I can drag a function call from my SAP connector onto the canvas and then using the panel at the bottom configure this activity. So I select the endpoint that I'm connecting to, in this case my SAP instance. Moving on to configure, I am then allowed to select the function call. Clicking browse gives me a list of these functions, and by typing in the function I am after I can jump to it in the list. It will now go off to SAP and retrieve the information for the parameters to be passed to that function and the data it's going to give me back. Clicking on map inputs gives me a list of those parameters for the function, and for the purpose of this demonstration I'm going to hard code these values to retrieve the first 6 customers from SAP. So I can right mouse click, define the default value, and this is just going to be 6, and then by setting the next 3 parameters here I'm going to specify that SAP is to give me back the first 6 records that it has in its customer table. Clicking on map outputs, this now shows me a list of the data that SAP is going to give me back, and I'm particularly interested in this address data and a recurring item record here. To make this available to subsequent activities, I can copy this over and create a variable which I'm going to name SAP response, and this is now going to contain the data that SAP is giving me back. To write this information to my SQL Server database, using my database connector, I can drag an insert rows activity onto the canvas. And then, running through the checklist, I will pick my endpoint, my database connection. Moving on to pick the table. On browse, I can then select my schema and also then my account table. This is a straightforward table. The first field is an ID, this is an identity, so it does not need to be set by CastIron. Moving on to delivery rules, I can batch the records that are coming out, so I can optimize my database connectivity and also specify how the delivery of those messages is going to occur. On map inputs then, I can now map my SAP data onto my database activity. So by clicking select inputs, I can choose my SAP response variable, and I can now drag the field information from SAP onto my database. So I can drag name, country, city, the street, the telephone number, for example. If I wish to apply a function at a field level, then within CastIron we have a tab for functions, and I can drag, let's say, an uppercase function onto the country, right mouse click and apply that function graph. It also gives me the option to create new custom functions at the bottom here, and these can be written in JavaScript. The only other item I now need to specify is how is this orchestration going to start. CastIron provides many options for this, one of which, as we've seen, is to do an HTTP receive request, so we can receive a REST-based URL. We can also use a provide service activity so that this orchestration can be provided as a web service for another application to invoke. In this particular demonstration I'm just going to drag a scheduled job onto the front of this orchestration and specify that it's going to start every 10 seconds. So So I'm going to hit save just to save off my project. Now, CastIron Studio and the development environment provides a method of testing the orchestration by clicking on Verify. I can then hit the play button and this will invoke my orchestration from start to finish. As soon as it's loaded up my SAP libraries, it will now wait for the starter activity to occur. So 10 seconds after I've hit play approximately, the scheduled job will start and we can now see that it's running. It will then go on to invoke the function call and also then insert the rows into the database. It's now completed and we can open up on this on the right hand side here and we can interrogate the data for each and every activity. So for the insert rows, for example, I am receiving my SAP response variable and this contains the data you can see here in the bottom right, the XML data of my SAP instance. If I move now to my SQL Server instance, this is the SQL Server Management Studio. I have my account table here on the right hand side and I'm querying my account. Presently speaking, there is just one record. If I then go on to execute the query and refresh the screen, you can now see that there's more data here, customer 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and some address information. This has come from SAP. And that ends the first part of this demonstration. Thank you.